a bit of time. It's interesting to look back because Chapo had to spend a number of months outside of Vassar because he was having issues with substance abuse. And he wound up coming back and graduating, but there was a little bit of an interruption in his time at Vassar. So to make a very long story somewhat short, Chapo at this point was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in its very early stages, right? Which is a good thing, right? I mean, they caught it super early. For those of you who have had the terribly awful experience in knowing someone who's had cancer, you may know that the survival rate for this form of cancer is one of the lowest of all forms. Regardless of when it's caught, the belief is that pancreatic cancer is almost certainly a death sentence, right? And to make matters even more confounding, Chapo was only 34 years old when he was diagnosed, super young. And pancreatic cancer is, as far as I know, a type of cancer that really only strikes much later in life. So it's far before the age that this cancer typically strikes. So surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, Chapo seemed to handle his diagnosis far better than any of us. He was, besides being an incredible athlete, like this guy was absolutely brilliant. He was a scientist. We will forgive him for that, of course, but he was absolutely brilliant. He was constantly asking progressive questions about everything, not the least of which was the progress of modern medicine, his line of work. He would hold people in the hospital accountable for what they were doing and what they weren't doing, and he seemed to know more than they did. He was optimistic. He was about the beneficial and the curative aspects and aspirations of his treatment. He never rested with a response that was rooted in status quo. He never did that. Like something like, we've tried that before, it didn't work, or conversely, this is how we've always done it. He never did that. He always sought new paths in science, specifically. He was creative about it. He was forward-thinking, he was a risk-taker, he was a critical thinker, and he held other people accountable for when they were not forward-thinking, when they were not risk-taking, when they were not willing to lend that critical insight. And what I'm going to say right now, I really mean, Chapo would have been the best, in my estimation, the best teacher any one of you possibly could have had. He was an amazing person. So last August, fast forward a little bit to just about 1 year ago, things changed a bit. A group of us received an email, again from one of our former captains, that Chapo had suddenly taken a significant turn for the worse. The email suggested that if we wanted to see Chop before he left us, it would be important to come as soon as possible. So I remember where I was, when I got it, got the message, didn't ask any questions, didn't take anything with me. I just headed down to New York City to visit Chapo at Cornell Med, which is where he was staying. And when I arrived there, it was cool. There was a group of my old friends and teammates and former classmates from Vassar gathered around Chapo on his bed. And he wasn't in good shape. He wasn't in good shape at all. It was really one of the most horrifying experiences in my life to have seen someone whom I remembered to be super strong, super gifted athlete, to see him in the state that he was. To put it mildly, there was not much left to Chapo's exterior, though his mind was as sharp as it ever had been. As soon as I walked into the room, you could imagine I was wearing a Mets shirt, Mets fan. As soon as I walked into the room, I was greeted by his voice, which was by now significantly weakened, and he was like, "What's up, Ganasty? Those Mets have really been playing shitty lately, huh?" And this is last year when they were bad. They're going to win the National League, so. So he's like, that's how he greeted me. That's how he would have greeted me in 1996 through 2000. In the hospital room, there was ESPN in the background. It was like not a day had gone by, right? And I had been very well used to his taunts of my affinity for the Mets, given his love for the Yankees. So while we were there, and I don't have I'd rather not show a picture of the time that we were there, but our group conversations during that brief visit were varied. Many of us recall the wonderful times we had as undergraduates on and off the baseball diamond. Some of those conversations involved how we could help Chapo sit more comfortably in his current hospital bed, because it's, you sit in the same position for so long, like many of you are doing right now, it gets uncomfortable. Other conversations we just totally stayed out of because we didn't know how to participate. So those were the ones like, Chapo was acutely questioning the doctors and nurses who were treating him, almost to the point of interrogation. He was so invested in his own health and his own survival. It almost seemed like an interrogation. It's kind of uncomfortable. Chapo's mind was like a Rolodex. I wrote Rolodex here. I don't know how many of you know what a Rolodex is. Raise your hand if you know what a Rolodex is. Good. All right, so at least, can a faculty member explain what a Rolodex is?
It's an old-fashioned filing system that you put names of people and maybe their contact information. Education. Yeah, actually.
Yes. Now we have the cloud. We have the clouds. But his mind really was like the equivalent of the cloud. He didn't forget anything. He didn't miss any facts. He remembered medication schedules. He remembered dosages of medication he was to receive. He remembered the timing of treatments. This all happened in a matter of a half hour of our staying there. His knowledge of everything. He was his own strongest advocate, right? And in the midst of this apparently terminal situation, he was at least in spirit the same Chapo from the years past that we knew and we adored. About a month after the visit, Chapo left us. And his funeral was an amazing celebration of his life and the lives that we all shared together with him. Chapo's death caused me to rethink a significant number of things about my own life. And it really was it was at that moment when my reflection on the looking glass self began to occur at like a super fundamental level. How we are apt to gain a far better understanding of ourselves by investing ourselves as fully as possible in understanding the lives of others. At some level, it may sound cliche to say that I've learned a number of things about myself after Chapo's passing that I didn't already know. It sounds cliche to say that, right? I've learned a lot about myself seeing this. I think it's fair to say that most of us try to see educational value post any sort of hardship, right? Like when something bad happens to us, we try to take the good out of it and try to learn something from it. But in this instance, I was at least able to learn this about myself, and I'll share this with you, try to be as succinct as possible. So I'm the type of person who is forever unable to allow positive instances in my life to have any positive reverberation for a long period of time, like for a period longer than a few minutes. Something good happens, great, it'll happen, I feel good for about 2 minutes, and then I'll move on to the next thing. What's next on the docket? I'm someone who tends to dwell on the less than positive. Notice I didn't say negative, but I said less than positive, as it applies to my own goals and my own aspirations in my own life. I'm someone who always asks, what more could I have done, than someone who affirms what he's already done well. I'm someone who will always ask, what now, instead of feeling the pride of hearing someone say, well done, Matt. All of this might seem totally cliched. I get that, like I promised it wouldn't be. But if you dig a little bit deeper, and if you're the type of person who can relate to anything of what I just said, then you know how confounding and frustrating and even depressing this mode of thinking can be. It just sucks. I don't know what it all stems from, and I don't quite know how to solve it. And I will tell you this, I particularly scoff at people who give me the advice for fixing it that for them seems routine, right? Just do this and we'll solve it. But for me, it usually seems impossible. We're all different, right? So one person's advice for him or herself may not work for somebody else, right? Nevertheless, my looking into Chapo's life, and I don't mean the days nearing the end of his life, gave me perspective about the person I am because of the person I observed that he was. The tenets of the looking glass self are super challenging, no doubt. They're challenging because they urge us to focus our attention on the most complex entities that exist, ourselves and other people. It adds the wrinkle as well to place the primary focus on the other, prior to the secondary focus of itself. And so I'll leave you with a few hopes for this year for us as a community of students and faculty. For us, I hope that we can be authentically cognizant of the differences we have, so that when we disagree with one another, when we get angry at one another, when we choose to ignore one another, shouldn't do that in the first place, but if we do, we at least realize and appreciate that we are all simply trying to do the best we possibly can do, and we are all trying to be responsible people for one another. I think we have to make that a primary assumption before we cast judgment on people. We're all just trying to do the best we can. I hope that we can take the opportunities to be present for each other in ways that others need our presence. And finally, I hope for us that as we continue to develop our voices to speak out about our passions both inside and outside the classroom, we constantly remind ourselves of the need to and the value of active and compassionate listening as a means of achieving societal progress. I hope that we can continue to build on all the great work we've already done, and I know with a focus on building and sustaining the well-being of those sitting immediately next to us, behind us, in front of us, all around us, we can even more fully understand and therefore embody our school's challenging and wonderful motto, Know Thyself.